Perfect. Hello and welcome to Claigan's webinar. We're going to be talking the SCIP updates from the ECHA guidance from July. A bit more of clarification, and we're going to talk about distributor, simple SCIP notification, and more practical details. Definitely going to talk practical. We're a big fan of practical. And we're also going to talk about the new 4 REACH SVHCs from June. What are they? Where are they? Whether they'll even likely be in your products. And I'm Bruce Calder. I'm the VP of Consulting Services here at Claigan, and I'm going to be your host today. So we're going to talk a variety of things, a tiny intro, and then I'm going to talk a little bit of SCIP updates. I'm going to talk a little bit about the representative article approach, simplified SCIP notification, the software changes expected in August, and then we'll talk about the new REACH SVHCs from June 25th of 2020. What they are, whether they'll likely be in your product at all. And then we'll talk a bit about SCIP compliance process with the deadline approaching. And then we'll have Q&A. So the webinar is intended to be about 50 minutes long with about 10 minutes Q&A. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit in the chat section. I'll try to get to as many as possible. So of course, we do lots of stuff. We're probably the highest volume product testing lab for restricted materials in North America. When in doubt, you want someone to test something, just send us a picture or web link. We just have to know what it is, and it's easy to test for, especially for the new EU MDR requirements, medical device regulation, but also if you have a new product in particular, testing is easily the most efficient way to go. In a couple weeks, you solve all your problems at one time. It's much easier. We also, if you like what we're doing here, definitely one of our most popular services are monthly or quarterly updates where we sit down with you. We have a web meeting just with you and your stakeholders. It's interactive. You ask questions and we explain the changes. So like the REACH SVHC section we're going to talk about later on, this is a normal part of the service amongst many other things. And then we're going to talk, we also do a lot of SCIP web demonstration templates and then creating the SCIP files. So we're going to talk about the practical element of the process, creating how we create the first files using engineering evaluation, how that's done, and then how to create the files for each of your models numbers, and then how to submit. So we do as little or as much as you need. Definitely the easiest, best bite-sized section is for us to create the first ones with you and show you exactly how it's done, give you all the templates. Really, really straightforward. Whether you want to do it externally or internally later, it gives you the option. They'll give you the capability to do yourself. And of course, we're using the same process so we can do any products you want for you. So practical elements, and go into this a tiny bit later, there's really 3 phases for us. We normally establish the basics, so we do definitely recommend doing it right now. I wouldn't delay this one much. Where we sit there, we explain the rules, because a lot of complicated rules about product grouping and component grouping and how you handle safe use instructions and how you put it together. How you maintain it. So we explain all of that, and then we actually review a product with you. We take one of your products and we go through it in detail with you and show you the part types that can have SVHCs, what SVHCs they are and why. We leverage any BOM or ROS or REACH data you have, but we also do it through engineering evaluation. I'll explain a little bit as this goes on why that's very practical. We create the product and the component templates, no matter what method you use, whether it's testing or data gathering, engineering evaluation. When you have a declarable like lead and brass, you need an IUCLID component template to submit for it, because you have to have safe use instructions and materials codes and customs codes and all that kind of thing for the component. So we create the component templates like the Lego building blocks that you use for every product. The fact you have lead and brass, probably most of your products have that. And so why not just use the same template over and over again? And we explain also things that are not declarable, leaded glass, like thick film resistors, so on and so forth. And we explain how you create a solution path for every situation. And then we create from these Excel files, and we create Excel first because Excel is much more for human beings. IUCLID's a bit newer and not for everybody. We're all here pretty good at it, but it's not for everybody. And so we also create the IUCLID file for a product. So you know how to do it and create a full IUCLID file for the product. And for the next phase, you're set up to do it yourself. Phase 2, we can help you as much as you need to, but also we're using the same process. So we can also do it for you. It's really straightforward. We basically use the same process in a shortened form, what we do in the web demonstration, and create your SCIP files for you and do it in the week or 2 time frame, not months and months. It's really straightforward. And then when you need to register, You're going to want to register yourself, and we'll explain a little bit why that is. Because we've done so many chemical registrations, you're going to want to own your own password, but we'll support you through it. And as easy as what we often do is web, for this kind of registrations, we web meeting in, and we look over your shoulder and we show you the buttons. Registration itself is really easy. Once you've created the file, which all the first two phases create, you just drag drop the file in and you get a SCIP number punted back to you. So it's really easy. Drag drop into your account, has to be European entity account, drag drop it in, boom, get a SCIP number back. It's fine. That's not the hard part. The hard parts are phase 1 and 2. Phase 3 is people are like, well, can you help us with registration? It is literally drag drop of files into the system and getting a SCIP number back. It's not difficult. We just web meeting in with you. Can we do it for you? Sure, but we find in practice a lot of companies don't want to give up their corporate passwords into a system like this. So it ends up, for practical purposes, we end up web meeting in with them. You do the submission, and we just explain any buttons as you go through it. So really easy, 3 phases. One you want to do right now. You really want to do the basics and create your first declaration. You don't want to be shopping around for different providers at this point in time. It's kind of pointless until you've actually done one. Do one. Figure out what you have to do and go, oh, okay, this makes a lot more sense. Because you're going to want to spend more time on how you group your products together and declare your products than worrying about a lot of the weeds. When we have to create files, you'll have everything you need. However, we can do it for you. And you can do for a particular model in 1 or 2 weeks instead of some extended program. It's really straightforward. And then when we're with registration, we're here to support you. Sure, we can physically do it, but for as I mentioned before, you're going to want to keep your own password. So we find, as much as somebody wants us to do it, for chemical registrations, for example, when we get to the end, their business unit wants to control their own passwords, which makes lots of sense to me. And we just web meeting in and help you through any of the bugs. So really straightforward. We're here to help. When in doubt, just contact us. You definitely want to be doing the first section by now. So what we're talking about here is updates to SCIP, the substance of concern in articles as or such in complex objects products, SCIP. So the reason the ACA is moving towards simple acronyms, it's much easier to communicate from one person to another. If you have to communicate this to management, which may never have heard about it before, you want to be able to say SCIP, or a simple word they're likely to remember. And I've told this story many, many times. Is many years ago, we won a variety of awards, and during some of the presentations, one of the speakers was a magician, former tax lawyer, actually. And a lot of great presentations and showing how magic is very much on preparation and preparing for different scenarios. But one neat thing that came out of it is he mentioned, why is David Copperfield the most successful magician in the world? He makes Beyonce or more level money. He makes incredible money. And a lot of people talked about his specifics about his tricks or showmanship. It's like, sure, we all have great tricks. We all have great showmanship. His gift is to make every one of his tricks a single sentence so he can tell someone else. He made the Statue of Liberty disappear. He walked through the Wall of China. And so ECA is doing a lot more of that. So you're seeing CoRAP and SCIP, and they're all creating simple acronyms that you can communicate to other stakeholders to help simplify the communication process in a very changing environment. So if manufacturers need to register their product in their SVHCs in IUCLID by Jan 5th, 2021, if any component in the product contains an SVHC above 0.1% by weight. And so manufacturer is not the factory. It's not the person who designed or necessarily made the product. It's the brand owner. So manufacturer for the EU is the brand owner that's placing the product on the market under its own brand, similar to CE marking. They all use very similar definitions. It's the brand owner of the product being placed on the market. There's different versions of the database available, and the database is really 2 different sections. The main section is the file creation system, which the prototype version is already available, and that's what we're going to be talking about. And there's an update of it we'll be talking about briefly in August. This isn't the registration system. The system will have registration in it eventually. It's really the file creation. It's the heavy workload. Once you create the I6Z file, registering is very simple. It's a drag drop process. It's really easy. So it's the file creation system, both web version or an offline version. They're basically identical. In October, at sometime in October, late October, they're going to have the registration system where you can drag drop the files in. So the system we're playing with right now isn't the registration system, but it's the file creation system, which is 95% of the IUCLID work. The rest is just drag drop and receive number. It's pretty straightforward. So we're talking about updates to this system. So deadline's coming really close. Believe it or not, we are now closer, the Jan 5th deadline, to when we met Joe Exotic. So the Tiger King debuted farther back in time than we have time remaining to the deadline. Just to put that in perspective, and if you have to explain to other stakeholders, the deadline is Jan 5th, 2021. We are closer to that deadline than we are to when we met Joe Exotic of the Tiger King. Now, the funny thing about this slide is always, of course, talking to people in Europe and Asia, they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm like, oh yeah, it's a Netflix thing. It's kind of hard to explain. It's a train wreck. Yeah. Well, in COVID, we're all stuck at home watching, binge watching series. So, but to put in perspective, we are now closer to the deadline than when we met Joe Exotic. And for those outside North America, feel free to Google it and come away a bit confused by the interest in it, but it's a very popular train wreck. So it's less than 6 months away. So you really want to have a nice path forward. So some of the updates we're talking about in SCIP. So you notice some people say, hey, wait a minute, how was that your update last month? And there's a lot of similarities. Yes, ECHA doesn't submit files on their own. They're getting feedback. And over time, they're refining a lot of the guidances. The guidances are also limited by some legal limitations. ECHA, the European Chemical Agency, and the EU Commission, for that matter, are not allowed to give opinions on definitions of terms or sections of regulations and directives. So ECHA cannot provide guidance on what is an article. That's defined by the law, and the only legal entity or the entity that can further refine it is the European Court of Justice. So they have to be really careful. And when ROHS came in a recast in 2011, that was a big part of when it came in. Some of the accompanying documentation said the EU Commission recognizes we actually cannot provide guidance on any of the terms in here. We can do FAQ, frequently asked questions, but we're not actually legally allowed to provide any definitions guidance. So ECHA is limited by they cannot define what an article is. It's not their responsibility. They can show you in different definition situations how to apply it in the database. And so often, and we'll talk about the representative worst reasonable case situation, how they say we can't recommend this because we cannot provide a definition of what an article is. But if you do it this, if you want to do it this way, this is how you do it. So we're going to talk about the representative article approach, how you group similar components or similar products together. We're going to talk about the distributor simplified SCIP notification system and requirements, which is a very burdensome add-on to the system. And we'll talk a tiny bit about the new software change in SCIP, which is mostly for specialists that care about it. So the representative article approach. So it's kind of neat. ECHA says we cannot recommend this, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, because they're not allowed to provide a definition of what is an article. And doing a representative worst case, is that legally sufficient to be an article? Well, they're not allowed to say one way or another. So that's why I say we can't recommend it. Not to say it's wrong, just we're not allowed to. However, if you want to use the worst representative article approach, this is how you do it. So they go on to say, we can't recommend this approach, but if you're going to, just in case you use it, this is exactly how you do it. So it's kind of neat. So it's the idea of taking the worst possible combinations of products and components in a product and reporting that, whether it's in a model or more all-encompassing, saying, hey, what can we just do the worst case scenario? We have alternative parts, supplier data is missing. Can we just do the worst case, reasonable worst case? And they say, well, we can't say that's allowed, but this is exactly how you do it. So in effect, they're saying, yes. So what they do is two different parts about it. We'll talk about how you merge a product together, but also the idea of using generic components. And so one of the concerns has always been, hey, I have to identify every single part in my product that has lead and brass. That's going to be very painful. Well, a couple things about that. A, the part numbers in your BOM will mean, or descriptions will mean 0 to the user or recycler. It's much better to use generic words like brass component. You can say it's a PN 144M, whichever, and a bunch of other letters, and they're going, I have no idea what that is. Or you can say, hey, it's a brass component. And they're like, oh, okay, I get that. So the idea is take all your leaded brass components and make a fictitious complex object, brass component, and have them linked to that. And this is the component templates we've been using, where instead of trying to recreate, the entire world every time you have an S-declarable SVHC part, why don't you group them in the same type? There only are about 20 common components with SVHCs in them. Your suppliers report a lot more. Most of the time they're wrong for a variety of reasons. It's actually one of the problems. So what you really want to do is you do component grouping. Say you can do this. You can, well, we can't recommend it, but this is how you do it. It's kind of funny. We can't recommend you do this, but this is exactly how you do it. And so it's the process we've been using since day one. The idea is you group similar parts together with the same SVHC, the same customs code, the same materials code. So brass components made of brass, it has the same materials code, they have the same customs code, they have lead, the same SVHC, same safe use instructions. You can group them together. Heat shrink commonly has the chlorine plus. It's one of the common replacement flame retardants for Deca BD. Deca is the only ROHS brominated flame retardant that's ever found. It's fantastic for thin plastics. Thin plastics still need the flame retardant. Dechlorine plus, which is a heavily chlorinated flame retardant, heavily halogenated, which is why it does the job, does a great job. So dechlorine plus is a relatively common thing in heat shrink. So can we just put the heat shrink together and say heat shrink dechlorine plus? And they say, well, we can't say that's allowed, but this is how you do it. So this is a big part of it. What we've been doing since day one and why engineering evaluation works so effectively is component grouping. They also talk about location. They would love you to go car, engine, water pump to O-ring, and they say phthalates, but probably O-ring to dechlorine plus. It's EPDM. They love that, not required. The only requirement legally is the product, the car, and the component, the O-ring, and the SVHC in it, the chlorine plus. That's it. So they have recommendations. They love you to gather in the supply chain every single layer all the way through and put it all together, but it's not required. And realistically, the supply chain is just not capable of doing that. It won't be capable of doing that any reasonable time. So they'll have lots of great examples, and they love for you to do the full assemblies all the way through locations, but it's not required. The legal requirement is only the product, the component with the SVHC in it, and the SVHC itself. Also, since they allow component grouping, like why can't we put all our bolts together? Then location goes out the window anyways. There's very little chance that your 20 lead and steel bolts are all in the same location. They're all over the place. So now allowing component grouping takes away a lot of the obvious location requirements. So the legally product, component that has the SVHC, the SVHC. Everything in between is nice and they love it, but it's not required. It's not part of the legislation. And the software itself allows it. As long as the software allows it, that's the limitation. ECHA only controls the software. If the software allows it, it's allowed. So that's a lot about component grouping, and we'll explain why that's so critically important. We knew it was coming since day one, and our process has been along that line the whole time because it's the only sensible way to do this. We have literally done thousands of declarations for dozens, if not more, if not 100 companies. We do a lot of this. We are right now the main provider in this space, and we've done so many. That's one of the reasons why we want to recommend you do one. You really need to do it to understanding. Wait a second, you'll have a number of epiphanies. I'm like, yeah, this makes a lot more sense. And yes, this is people will be telling you a lot of scary things. Fear does sell in our industry, I must say. People also want to sell their solution. We have, at Claigan, have always been around a long-term plan. We want to do what's best for you. What is the best solution for you? And that's fundamental. And that's a long-term plan. The short-term sale is not our interest. Our interest is what is in your best interest. I know everybody says that, but this is really true, actually. It's been probably our hallmark since day one. Definitely for us has always been there's got to be a better way. And that's really what got us going originally, more than a decade ago. And many of us worked in the previous decade in the same field. There's got to be a better way to do this. And then what's really held us up in definitely the long run. I mean, we have still basically all the clients we had in the very first year of business, more a decade ago, what is in the best interest for you? And that's a better long-term plan. It may not make the sale today. Actually, it's funny. The biggest arguments we often get with our customers is we're basically saying, what you want us to do here is not your best interest. You will spend money on it, but it's not your best interest. And we do get in arguments on that. must say. And that's always a bit awkward, but a long-term plan or guiding fundamental principles for us is there's got to be a better way to do things. There's always a better way. Keep working on a better way. And we'll do what's best for the client, for their products, and for their compliance. So a lot of what we've been talking about is it made sense for day one. This is the best way to do it. Now we're going to get into something which is really awkward. So this is a requirement. I can see pushback on this new section. This is called the simplified SCIP notification. So in Article 33 of REACH, there's a requirement for any provider of a product with an SVHC in a component about 0.1% by weight has to communicate to the recipient the SVHC. So this includes not only the manufacturer or brand owner, this includes the distributors, it includes everybody but the retailer selling to consumers. Somehow the retailer does not have to tell consumers immediately. They have a 45-day response window, which means they will request. So it's funny, the retailer doesn't have to, but if you sell to a retailer, you do, because you're not selling to a consumer, you're selling to another business. You need to communicate. So to meet that, they're saying, okay, so when a manufacturer puts their submission, how does the distributor do it? So this is the simplified SCIP notification where the distributor submits your SCIP number of the manufacturer into the system to create their own. Yes, this is going to sound overly burdensome and not low complexity. So this is out of the guidance from ECHA. It's a doozy. So imagine you're Acme in the United States, and believe it or not, you're in the US or Asia or outside the EU, you can use iEuclid to create the files. The main work element, 95% of the submission is creating the files. Anybody can create some files. We create the files for people, literally just email it to them. They're not very large. Here you go. Here's your SCIP file. And then they can submit it. Now, the submitting entity has to be a European entity. So the US or Chinese or Singapore or Taiwanese, whichever, can create the file. And then the company, then one of their European entities needs to submit it. So if you have a German and French entity, as long as one of them, we'll say the German entity, submits the file and gets a SCIP number, all the companies under the same company name or brand can use it. So even though it's the German entity that submitted and the French entity is a separate entity, if they're both Acme company, then they all can use the same SCIP number, so they can share it. However, when they sell it to a distributor, the distributor is required, I know, get with this, to get your SCIP number, okay, and then submit your SCIP number, the manufacturer's SCIP number, into the system, okay, and then get back their own SCIP number, really, to give to the next person, sure. So put it in perspective again. So slightly simplified, you make a bicycle, Acme makes a bicycle under their brand. They create the I6Z file, put it into the system, they get back a SCIP number. The SCIP numbers are not in the current version of the software, they will be in the August version. You get a SCIP number back. Awesome, company has a SCIP number. Then you sell the bicycle to distributor in, say, France. The distributor needs to get your SCIP number, okay, and then submit it into ECHA, and then get under their ID, and then get back a new SCIP number that they can provide to the next person. You're like, really? Yes. I can see pushback on this because I see when the distributors are like, wait a minute, I have to get the SCIP number or the fact it's not applicable for every product I sell from the manufacturer and then submit in the system and get back a new one. Are you kidding me? That's the current rule. I'm not saying it's going to stay, but that's the current requirement. So in a practical sense, if you're a brand owner, you need, as part of your submission, you're going to need to basically have a list of all your parts and whether it's not applicable or your SCIP number for all of them. In a perfect world, like conflict minerals, you want to create a single file that you can give to anyone who asks, here's my file, and they can pick and choose from it. This is actually a reasonable amount of your work is going to be this section. It's also a huge portion of the effective practical enforcement. The distributor's like, I need your SCIP number, otherwise I can't sell. And they're like, well, I don't have a SCIP number. And they're like, well, we can't sell. And that's going to be an interesting pushback. Now, the distributors are not as well versed in it. There are exceptions. Some of the main distributors, especially if electronic components, are aware of it. It's very impractical for them, but they're aware of it. So do expect a significant data gathering exercise. It doesn't mean the distributors know better right now, and this is all new, but they're required to get it. So to summarize again, a distributor gets your SCIP number. Awesome, no problem. Good luck with that. So they get the SCIP number for all their manufacturers. That means every one of their manufacturers has to be up to speed and have everything. Poor soul. And then they can put an Excel file in with all the different skip numbers and under their ID, and the system goes, awesome, here's the new numbers back to the original numbers you got. And by the way, these are like 20-character alphanumeric nonsensical numbers. It's not, you might as well be computers talking to each other. And you'll get back a new list of skip numbers that you can provide to the next person. So if you provide to another distributor, you have to give them the number, the distributor has to give them the number, and then that distributor puts in the system under their number. Yeah. Anyways, I can see pushback on this, but right now this is the way it is. So you will also get requirements for skip numbers from distributors. This is called the simplified skip notification. Seems a little overly burdensome from my point of view, but it is in the current requirements. ECHA is not meeting in August, so if this is going to change, it won't be till September, and we'll see. But this is the requirement. So this is the current guidance. I don't see this surviving scrutiny from distributors. I think they'll have a reasonable grounds of pushback. But until then, distributors are required to get the skip number for each product they sell, or in fact it's not applicable, which is true if you have no SVHCs in any component above 0.1% by weight. They have to submit the number under their ID into iEuclid. Joy. And then they have to get their own skip numbers back. I'm like, what do you mean you can't just use my skip number? Nope, they have to get their own. Really? So this will also create a very effective form of enforcement where in effect, they've turned the entire distributor networks in Europe into enforcement on the manufacturers to have skip numbers. So they're basically like, look, we're in Europe, we can't sell without your skip number. So we need it, we can't sell your product. I can see this being unnecessarily burdensome on distributors, but this is the way it is. August will also have a software update. There's going to be a new version of iEuclid. This is still not the registration system. It's the file creation system. There will be the simplified skip notification capability, except for you can't do anything with it. So I guess just to see what it looks like. You'll get skip numbers instead of ECHA numbers. You'll have an updated approach to reach SVHC list updates. Not quite clear how that is, but it's basically all going to be embedded in the system as opposed to you uploading updates and identifying updates. It's supposed to be embedded. So we'll see how that looks in the software. I understand how it looks in the XML, but how does it look in the software? And then we'll have dossier validation, where you can actually run the validation tool to validate that your I6Z file will pass when registered. So the idea, the files are all pre-validated. So when you drag drop it, it isn't going to barf on it. You can pre-validate it before you actually register the system. And that's what the new August version. So not very significant. There's also going to be a change in where it was manufactured. You now have not in the EU, in the EU, I'm not saying, and then both in the EU and not in the EU at the same time, which is an interesting one. Okay. So that's it for SCIP. If you have questions, please feel free to submit in the chat window, and I'll get to as many as possible at the end. Meanwhile, I'm going to talk about the new SVHCs. So there are 4 new SVHCs in June. And by the way, this is a very good example. We do this once a year. What we do for quarterly updates and monthly updates, where we sit down with you and explain what the changes are and how they affect you. So there were 5 SVHCs in the first half of this year up for review to become SVHCs. 4 made it, 1 did not. We'll explain the one that did not also. So in June, there were 4 new SVHCs. So we might as well explain what they are. I'm actually going to skip past the first 2 for a moment and go to the third one. So the third one is a very classic endocrine disruptor. Every single endocrine disruptor, human health, so every endocrine disruptor that's classified for human health under REACH SVHC are all the same thing. Either they or the metabolite, like nonylphenol ethoxylate, the metabolite nonylphenol, or the DHP phthalate, its metabolite, monoethyl hexylphthalate, has a phenol group. So either it or its metabolite has a phenol group, like bisphenol A. Phenol is the bottom half of this molecule. It's that benzene ring, that 6-sided ring with the OH sticking off the bottom. That's an alcohol group. That's a drunk benzene. It's an alcohol group on a benzene, which is a phenol. Estrogen, more particularly estradiol, has a phenol group. The active region of estradiol is the phenol group. It's what unlocks the estrogen receptor in the human body. So estrogen doesn't make you female. It unlocks the estrogen receptor, which creates the female body response. Other chemicals that have a phenol group or its metabolite after your liver metabolizes them have a phenol group. can jimmy the lock, like this one. So they're all the same thing. And if you're an endocrine disruptor of human health, and you're estrogenic, which is this, which creates a female body response, you have a number of negative outcomes. Young males, an estrogenic response gives them a form of anxiety, which is normally diagnosed by the symptoms like attention deficit, but it's a form of anxiety. Younger females, they get overdose of female, their ovaries grow too fast. They grow to 150% or so the normal size. And then you start seeing ovarian cyst or polycystic ovarian syndrome. Adult males, it's quite straightforward. Adult males, if they become more female, their sperm count goes down. And that's the easiest way. They have basically less swimmers. And that's one of the easiest ways for them to test for it in rats. They can do it on sperm count. And that's a typical estrogenic effect in an adult male. Adult female is quite a bit different. Estrogenic responses can manifest in many ways. One of the most common is osteoporosis. One of the, if it wasn't so sad, it would be funny. One of the biggest misconceptions in the world that adult females should take calcium. Calcium supplementation as an adult has no effect on bone density. It only affects it during the growth phases in childhood. It has no positive effect in adults. Osteoporosis is an estrogenic effect. It's more endocrine disruptors, or estrogen is a more important factor. So exercise is a much bigger factor in preventing osteoporosis than calcium is. Calcium has no positive impact. Calcium supplementation or milk supplementation will increase your risk of post-concussion syndrome, because a lot of post-concussion syndrome is lack of clearance of the calcium 2+ ion. But it has no positive effect on bone density. It's kind of one of those many different things in the world that are misconceptions. So this is a very common one. However, it's only in cosmetics and personal care products, which is kind of not a good plan for an estrogenic substance to be in cosmetics. So there's no use in physical products. It's a cosmetics and personal care, not used in articles. We keep revisiting the uses, but this doesn't have a finished product use. So it's very low risk in finished products or articles. So this is unlikely to be a declarable substance in most products. Now, the first two are the same family. They're part of a new family of reproductive toxin. They will probably be the next group of endocrine disruptors. So all the endocrine disruptors we talked about so far are all the same thing. They're estrogenic. Either they or their metabolite have a phenol group, and they trigger the estrogen receptor and create a female body response. These fellers are thyroid disruptors. They prevent the formation of the T4 hormone, and it creates an imbalance between T3 and T4 hormone to the thyroid, which is commonly called hypothyroid, and which is a reproductive toxin. So they all have basically similar structures, usually a 5-sided molecule with a nitrogen attached. A number of the substances, the new SVHCs in January, were also of this family, as are these two. This time of year is when you get the biggest dosage of this family and the other family. So one of the most common versions of this is benzotriazole, which is if you have a dishwasher and you use little dishwasher tabs and you get the complete version or the one with a little ball on top that polishes your silverware. That's benzotriazole, and that's a thyroid disruptor. North America doesn't have a classification for that kind of reproductive toxin, so not restricted here. The other one, the most common one we see in physical products is 2-MBT, mercaptobenzotriazole. It's a vulcanization agent in rubber. When they blame the bladder cancer and such on little black pellets in field turf indoors, they want to blame the pHs. That's exactly what a thyroid disruptor like 2-MBT does. And it's only Prop 65 regulated, not here yet. This family are mostly UV curing agents. This one is not. It is actually an intermediate to make a specific kind of antibiotic. Does not have a use in physical products, very low volume substance too. Doesn't have a use in physical products, very low risk in your to be above 0.1% by weight in any of your products. The other one in the family is a little bit different. This one's similar to the ones in January and some of them from last year. It's a vinyl-imidazole. It is a reproductive toxin. It's the same thing. Look at the 5-sided molecule with a nitrogen group there. They could be triazoles, they could be imidazoles. There's different variations of each other. It's a reproductive toxin. It is an intermediate that normally fully reacts. This is common for all the UV curing agents. Most of the SVHCs in this family are UV curing agents. So imagine you make a integrated circuit and you want to print little letters on top of it. And if you look at a lot of your integrated circuits, you see little words on them. But you're making them so quickly, you don't want to sit there and wait for the ink to dry. So what they do is they use UV curable ink where they write it on, and then the ink goes under a UV curing lamp and cures the ink on. When it cures, two things are happening. One, to do the curing, this molecule breaks down, or this family breaks down and decomposes, and that's part of the curing process. So even drops below 1,000 ppm in the ink. But for the SVHP purposes, any ink on a physical product, it's a chemical until it's inked on. Any ink that's placed on the package is measured over the weight of whatever it's inked onto. And any residual imidazole in the UV curing ink is trivial to the weight of whatever it's inked on. So it's extremely low risk of being in the product. You will get some of these declared through your supply chain, though. And one of the many problems with supplier data gathering is a lot of them do it from safety data sheets, which makes sense. But on the safety data sheet, they will have this or other chemicals like TGIC and powder coating above 0.1% by weight. But that's in the uncured homogeneous material. In the cured version on the article, they drop well below 0.1. But often that information from the original suppliers communicated through the whole supply chain. It's one of the reasons why we do SVHCs, whatever outputs you have, we want you to create a solution path to each. So you have lead oxide or lead from thick film resistors. That is commonly declared. It is not an SVHC, it's leaded glass. So on and so forth. You get vinyl imidazole, like, no, it's from the original UV ink before it's cured, placed on the package, it's well below 0.1% by weight. Even though it was in the safety data sheet above 0.1 in the ink, on the final product in curing, that's well below 0.1. So it's an NA. You get lead and brass, you use the leaded brass component template. So the idea is you create a solution path for each situation, and you just reuse. And at the end of the day, you'll realize you only have 15 or 20 solution paths, half of which are not applicables. And then you use the same solution paths over and over again. It's just a much easier way to do things. And so if we do the web demonstration, explain it, that's a big part of what we do. We explain the solution paths and we provide the component templates for the positive occurrences of SVHCs. So this is a common type, very low risk to be in your product, about 0.1% by weight, both because when it's cured, it breaks down, it decomposes. And secondly, any residual amount is over the weight of whatever it's inked onto, which it becomes a trivial concentration. REACH SVHC is not homogeneous materials. It's not ROHS. It's per article. It's not until it's no longer in chemical form is it applicable. Same thing with adhesives. If you use adhesive to glue two things together, the adhesive is a chemical up to the point where it glues two objects together. Once you glue those two objects together, any SVHC in the adhesive is measured over the weight, the combined weight of the two objects it was glued together. So, by the way, one of the most common endocrine disruptors you're going to see, it's not classified yet in Europe. It's flying along. It's a similar family to this, and this is the one you get all the exposure this time of year. It's octosalate. So if you get sunscreen, flip it around. If you see octosalate, which will often have benzophenone with it, that's an endocrine disruptor. Do not place it over large surface areas of skin. It's very convenient because it and benzophenone gets a lot of bad rap, but it's a skin penetration. It's a dermal penetrator. So the benzophenone allows the octosalate to better penetrate your skin, which is why it's so popular, because you don't have to clean it off. Chemical sunscreens like octosalate, which have high dermal penetration, get absorbed by your skin. People say, oh, it's great, I don't have to wash it off. I'm like, oh my goodness, that's an endocrine disruptor. Do not place it over large surface areas of skin of children in particular. If you want to get a sunscreen, a safer version, and the inconvenient version, by the way, is zinc oxide. Zinc oxide is more like wearing clothing. It physically blocks the sun instead of a chemical element. Unfortunately, you often have to wipe it off. Zinc oxide is that kind of white sunscreen, the old classic one you see in like the lifeguard's nose and stuff. That's zinc oxide. That one's safe. It's just physically blocking the UVs. Octosalate is a very potent endocrine disruptor. Should not be placed over large surfaces of skin. So if you get a sunscreen, flip it around. It'll have often different names, but octosalate, if that's one of the ingredients, it's probably not a good plan to put over a large surface area of skin. And the fourth one is the bit what's a bit contentious. It's a dibutyl tin. Many other dibutyl tins are regulated. It is used in paint as a catalyst, and it does not decompose. It actually is usually residual in the paint above 1,000 ppm. But it's really only used in polyurethane coatings. So there's some argument that's where whether it's used in rigid PVC, like dioctyl tin, DOTE is, it's not. It's only used in polyurethane coatings. And any SVHC in a coating is measured over the weight of whatever it's coated onto. And the remaining weight of the coating is trivial. Now, you have people saying it can be used in PVC because it's dibutyl tins. This one doesn't have a use there. It's physically possible, but very unlikely. And if you use it in PVC, it often actually decomposes and drops in concentration. So it's only used in coatings. So because same reason as others, even though this one's not consumed, the coating is a chemical and it's not declarable until it's coated onto the product. And once it's coated on, it's the residual amount of the dibutyl bis tin in the overall coated product that's declarable, and it drops below 0.1. So this is the one that would be contentious. Hey, you could use this in PVC theoretically, but it isn't. Not all dibutyl tin's the same. This one's used in polyurethane coating. So it's also very low risk in physical products. There we go. And last one, this one didn't make it. It's Resorcinol. Often it's the most common anti-acne cream. It's retin A. To become an SVHC, all the countries have to be unanimous. In this case, only the majority agreed it's an endocrine disruptor. In the science papers we follow, it is often the control material, like estrogen, used to identify how endocrine disruptive that material is. It's very well known. It is literally a phenol. It does have a use in physical products. It's in aramid, Kevlar, fiber reinforced rubber. So if you have fiber reinforced rubber, it could have been a declarable, like car tires, conveyor belts. However, it didn't make it on the list right now. It's going through the long process, which goes back to the EU Commission, and usually takes about 2 years, like the phthalates did for endocrine disruption, and it'll likely be an SVHC in about 2 years, but it's not right now. So it didn't make it on the list. So again, that's a good example of what we do in quarterly and monthly updates. We explain all this. You can ask questions. You say, hey, wait a minute, I have conveyor belts or I have a fan belt. How's this apply? We work with you on that. So again, SCIP database, it's less than 6 months away. We are closer in time to the deadline than when the Tiger King first came out, to put that all in perspective. So you really want to find a efficient path to get there. You can do it yourself. It is complicated. These are all the fun things you have to go through for a typical product. It's quite involved in following all the different processes and Excel sheets and all that kind of thing. What we'll do is we'll set you up to do it. We'll give you all the templates, but we can do it for you. It is quite complicated, but we're quite happy to do as little or as much as you need. We can show you how to do it, and you can do it, and we can support you, or we can show you how to do it. And then for any business unit, or if you have time or resource constraints, it's very easy for us to do it. Once we establish the same process between yourselves and ourselves, it's really easy to do any product you need. Data gathering, quick note on data gathering. Nobody enjoys data gathering, supplier data gathering. I can't think of anybody who enjoys supplier data gathering. Why? It's long, often takes 6+ months, it's expensive, it never works right. And it's also very intangible to upper management. It's always difficult to say, well, we're partway through, you guys done? No, when are you be done? When the suppliers will get back to us? Well, when's that? It's just not very rewarding. Nobody enjoys this. Data gathering projects are what I would give to people I do not like. It's true. Conflict minerals, it makes sense. There's the only way to do it. Data gathering in general for restricted materials is, I feel bad for anybody who ends up having to do this. It's just, we used to do this. Again, we are a big fan of doing what's best for the client. It doesn't, as we move into, we have a lot more ISO certifications. Data gathering just doesn't meet any of our quality requirements. And we kept having to make excuses why we could allow it in our quality system. And eventually we said, you know what? Our main mandate is to do it right and do it for the right reasons. It's just not a good way to do it. It doesn't meet any, we got our quality people, director of quality got tired definitely of making excuses on how we accept it in our quality system. Data gathering, we know from our test lab, it's not truthful. It's painful trying to explain to a customer why you're only like 70% through, or why the data is full of errors and so on and so forth. It's just not enjoyable, and nobody enjoys supplier data gathering. So how do you do it with SCIP? And with the time frame, it's just not going to do it here. So the practical version we talked about is we first establish the basics, work with, and take a product and do it hands-on. PowerPoint is awesome and wonderful and a neat tool, but we like to be much more tangible. especially when you have other stakeholders like engineers and say, hey, look, we're going to talk about your IC, we're going to talk about your silicone rubber, we're going to talk about your heat shrink, we're going to talk about your brass or steel or aluminum, we're going to talk about your Viton, we're talking about interesting things. And this is what you declare. Do it visually, and then create the Excel versions, and then create the iUclid versions. And then at that point in time, you'll have all the tools to create it. But we're not leaving you on your own. We can support you. And you're like, well, this is awesome, but it's still going to take us forever, and we don't quite understand it. We can do it for you. It's really straightforward. What we'll do with you instead is say, hey, this is the rules for grouping the products. You group the products together, and you will save the most money and effort by good product grouping. And that will save the money itself just to pay for any of the rest of the project. And then when you register, we can support you through it. Yes, we could register for you, but you're not going to want us to. We've been through this many, many times. Chemical registrations, you're going to want to own your own password, but we can literally web meeting in over your shoulder and do it with you. So what you want to do now, I mean, we've tight time frame, is do the basics. We call it the web demonstration, where we sit there, we explain the rules, the process, product grouping, component grouping, and then we take one of your products and walk you through it. I have to leave this meeting right on time to do this. We do this all the time. There's many of us know how to do it. It's very common work practice for us. So we go through, we create the product templates, we create it for that product, we provide the component templates that are the Lego building blocks of your declarations, lead component, lead and brass component, high temp solder, etc. We create the iUclid file for you, and which contains all the different hierarchical component templates. So again, basically after the first stage, we can then support you. So we're like, hey, some people are really experts at this. You know what? I've got lots of data. I know what I'm doing. I just want to come back. When I run into things I don't understand, can you help me? Sure. Or others like, I can do it, but my second business unit can't. Can you just do it for them? Sure. Let's just figure out what your model groupings are. What are your different models? Here they are. Awesome. We'll do it for you, and it will take a week or two instead of months and confusion. One of the advantages of working with experts in it, we're a lot more efficient, so the cost is effectively a lot lower. And then when you need to register, it's straightforward to do with you. Long run, what a best-in-class companies, you work with everybody. Legacy products is usually done through a supplier specification, engineering evaluation, and testing of representative units. This isn't necessarily for SCIP. This is if for ROHS and the new PFOA is one of the most important things. As long as you've tested something, when you're wrong, there's basically no penalty. But legacy products don't have the budget to test everything. So not necessarily for SCIP. I mean, SCIP testing does work fantastically well. But if you're doing SCIP, SCIP is very favorable to engineering evaluation. But if you're doing ROHS updates and Prop 65 and SCIP and all these things at one time, testing a representative unit, one of each type, to show you've tested these things and applied the information. And when one of your products are wrong, your supplier makes a mistake, there's no penalty. But new products, definitely best in class, is going with the supplier spec. So it's really important that suppliers have to know what they'd be compliant to, because that's kind of the whole point. So the idea is when a new product's being developed, the restricted materials prime is part of the specification phase, identifies what it needs to be compliant to as it comes out of pre-manufacturing. And then usually the easiest thing at that point in time is just to create, especially when parts are changing all the time, a requirement coming out of manufacturing, usually for testing. Testing is probably the fastest way to do it. When you have time to market, it's a big deal. And for new products that have to be compliant to 8 or 10 different things, it really works out. It's not like it costs 8 times as much to do 8 regulations. They have huge overlap. So as we're seeing more and more best in class, SCIP right now with all your legacy products, engineering evaluation is one of the best ways to go. However, testing will, from an accuracy point of view, is always superior. New products, when you have to do ROHS and REACH, and both types of REACH, and Prop 65, POP, and all those kind of things, Canadian Prohibition, testing is the easiest way to go. Specify upfront what you need, make sure the suppliers know what you need, and then test it out of pre-manufacturing. So that's what we're seeing in best in class, and their compliance is not only vastly superior, it's cheaper and faster. So again, what do we need to quote? You want to do laboratory testing? We just need a picture or web link to the products. Very strongly recommended for new designs. It's just the best way to go. Monthly or quarterly updates, like we're doing here today, but very interactive. Or if you need the SCIP web demonstration templates, that initial now section, very recommended, very set piece. We do it all the time. You get the benefit of the cost advantage that we do this all the time. We know exactly what we're doing. We're not sitting around creating a process from scratch. You're not creating slides from scratch. You're not paying for hours and hours of development work. You're just getting your output. So it's really, really popular. So we'll go in the Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to put in the questions window, not Joe, in a questions window, and I'll try to get to as many as possible. Oh, great question. When it's done, do we get the slides? Yes, everyone who registered will receive a copy of the slides. And also, there will be a recording available on our website, hopefully the YouTube link. And the nice thing about the YouTube link is you can scroll back the speed of my speaking to about 70%, which is very popular for a lot of people. I kind of try to jam as much as I can in a short window, and it doesn't always work out from a understandability point of view. I know the SCIP deadline is Jan 5th, but I assume this program will continue into the future beyond Jan to account for the new products being created. Yes. So the deadline is every product placed on the market after January 5th, 2021. It's individual units, not model. If they have an SVHC in any component, about 0.1% by weight, they have to be in the database. Which also an interesting for spares and repairs. Spares and repairs have the compliance deadline of the product they're repairing or upgrading. If a spare repair is coming into the EU after Jan 5th, but it's to repair or upgrade a unit that was placed on the market before Jan 5th, it does not apply to that spare repair. Any repair or upgrade or replacement part for a product has the compliance deadline the unit it is repairing or upgraded had. I've been able to successfully submit complex dossier into the ECHA submission portal. Well, no, you can't submit yet. We can create them in August, we can validate them, but you can't submit until October. They don't have the submission capability yet. Sort of two different systems. There's a system to create the files, which is most of the work, and that's what's available right now, being updated in October. And then there's a second file, the second part of the system, sorry, that you submit the file in. So it's like when we did chemical registrations, you create a dossier, an I6Z file, and then that is what, drag drop into the system come October. If manufacturers have a SCIP number generated by the time you are a distributor ready to disclose, can I create a standalone one? Can a distributor create one? Yes, because the importer is required to have it, and this will also mean cases where the manufacturer is not does not exist in Europe and does not sell themselves in Europe. There may be cases where the distributor has to create it. It's not recommended because they don't want the manufacturer and the distributor both create files, but yes, you can. And there's no, as much as they don't want duplication, there's no volume element to it. It's not like when you create your file, you say, hey, I do X number of tons a year. So the fact it's registered twice, if they disagree, it's an interesting problem, and that might create consternation, but there's no volume aspect to it. So it doesn't really duplicate. Do all the articles need a SCIP number or only those that contain SVHCs? Yes, that's a great question. Only articles that have an SVHC above 0.1% by weight in any component. If they do not have one, you want a way to be able to say it's not applicable. So when distributors ask and they look at your list of parts, and the ones that are not applicable have some level of NA or something, say not, you don't want to say not applicable, they're not in scope. You want to basically say some kind of answer, no SVHCs or something like that. So they understand, oh, it's not that it's not in scope, but this one just doesn't have SVHCs. Can we use the files created in August to submit in October? We believe so. There's always the possibility to make a change. They're making XML updates. The ones we've created up until now, we have to make a very small modification. It's one of the great advantages of the Excel versions. It makes it real easy to modify. But the August versions will be submittable, unless they make another change. So unless they change things, they'll be submittable. So any of the ones made in August will be submittable because they'll have the data validation capability, unless they change something, which we don't expect that. Can I validate my dossier without registering in ECHA? Yeah, you can sit there, you can be in the US or anywhere else and log into the system, create a file, and in the August version, validate it. In the current one, you can create it, you just can't hit the validation button yet. But in August, you can hit the validation button, and it doesn't involve submitting. Hello, we don't have an entity in the EU, but only in the US, but we sell to the EU. What is our obligation? So it cannot be sold in the EU unless the product, if it has an SVHC above 0.1% by weight in any component, is registered in the system. So if you can't do it, you can use a third party, or you can have a distributor do it for you. It has to be an EU entity of some sort. If you have a sales office, or you have a distributor that agrees to it, or unlike REACH chemical registration, it doesn't have the same only representative legal mumbo jumbo. You basically have to have somebody agree in Europe to do it for you. But there's no technical requirement other than their address who that is. Oh, here's the one. We use a polyurethane that contains 2-methyl-down. That's all I suspect is consumed during use, but it's listed on the SDS. Absolutely. And That'd be interesting to see what polyurethane, whether it's a coating or not. Love to actually have information on that SDS. It's usually in coatings, but if it's in a physical polyurethane, that'd be great to see. 2-mezazole is a UV curing agent, so yes, it would normally be consumed during production. Sorry, this is SVHC technical stuff. As the latest IT user group says, they're clearly not recommended. No, they're not saying it's not recommended. They're saying ECHA cannot recommend it. It's an interesting legal thing. They're not saying it's not recommended. It's saying they can't recommend it. It's not recommended by ECHA because ECHA is not allowed to recommend it. They're not saying don't do it. They're saying we can't guarantee this is the definition of the article and we have no legal jurisdiction to do so. But then this is how you do it. And the main legal obligation to be in the system, the correctness of your declaration is a lesser thing. So as long as you're in the system, the worst thing is if they disagree that's going to happen is they're going to say, you know what, in a year now, can you make this modification? But that's it. There's no penalty for it. They might request that you modify it in the future. But the reason it's not recommended is because ECHA cannot make recommendations in the definition of an article. But then they go on to show you exactly how to do it. Can you batch load declarations in a SCIP? Yes. You can literally take all your I6Z files, slide them over and drop them in. The actual most important thing is figuring how you're going to group models together, as opposed to the registration itself is drag drop. You can really take 100 files and just drag it in, let it go. It's creating those files. Often, if you have similar products, how to group them under a single listing. A SCIP number considered a unique identifier for the product and therefore the GTIN is no longer needed. I do not know. I'm not sure how SCIP numbers can interact with other requirements. Does dossier validation mean as in a SCIP update? Oh, so dossier validation is basically hit the button and it validates that you meet all the rules for the XML format. So XML will have a rule system and has a validation. All XML has to have a validation. So it basically, once you create it, you hit a button and it validates they meet all the XML rules. What is the punishment for failure to enter products into SCIP? If a product has an SVHC above 0.1% by weight, and you don't enter in the system, you cannot sell. And there's the practical element. The distributor is not allowed to sell it without your number, which creates whether they want to take the same risk as you, but you're not allowed to sell. Now, how can they stop you from selling? It'll be an individual national authority that if you're not allowed to sell it, they can use whatever mechanism they find applicable to prevent sale. Can you enter a foreign user and obtain a SCIP number? You get a SCIP number, yes. You can't register it. So anybody can do the work and get a SCIP number, but the registration will have to happen by EU party. But it'll be just drag drop of the file. Are spare parts covered by the product SCIP submission? Not a topic that's well covered. Two schools of thought, yes it is, and the other school of thought, no it isn't. So as a starting point, we normally for right now, we tell companies, assume your spare parts are under the parent. And if you're shipping in any repairs or spares today, they are unlikely to be for a new product. They're one from previous years and therefore would have its placed on the market deadline and therefore not be applicable yet. So either they are covered by the product or they're not applicable yet. Please let me know where a SCIP number should be listed in the documentation. For example, the REACH registration number is in an SDS section. The SCIP number doesn't have a specific location. You just have to be able to provide it. And it's pretty wide open legally how that's done. REACH registration, the legislation talks about where it goes in the safety data sheet. SCIP doesn't have that legal requirement. What info is needed for engineering evaluation? For costing, we just have to know what the example product is, and that's it. Because we're going to do an evaluation, we just have to know roughly and we just really need to know what the product is to identify how many component templates are going to be needed, but that's it. Just contact us. It's really straightforward. What product would you like to use as a representative? That one. This is exactly how much it is. This is how long it's going to take. And the original evaluation is only a couple of hours. It's really, really concise. You get to benefit from all the work everybody else does. How about components use proprietary components? You're supposed to disclose those. Generally, what we do is we, of course, genericize the part type, brass component, high temp solder component. So genericize, and which then eliminates basically anything custom. We don't say it's the so-and-so part from so-and-so. We say it's lead and brass. Are products for the automotive industry required to submit SCIP? if they're regulated by other regulations. SCIP is separate to ELV or ROHS or anything else. There's the only deltas are things that are governed by chemical legislation. Liquids and powders are not in scope in our articles. And you can make some arguments about military not being governed by this, but otherwise everything else is in. Do you know when the August version will be out? It's supposed to be mid to late August, and ECHA is really good at making the deadlines. They've been doing the system for years and years, but August is not the best for attendance in Europe, so it could be the end of August. Oh, 7,000 products do not contain SVHCs. Do I need to list SCIP with an NA comment? You need whatever you think you're going to need when distributor asks. So it could just be no SVHCs listed against all of them. Or it could be simplified if you're doing it by the model number, like the LN74 series. Whatever you think the distributor will understand, so they can handle it. And I apologize, I didn't get to all the questions. I have to drop off right now. Thanks for everybody hosting, and please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help, and I look forward to talking to everyone again soon.